Saturday morning silence?
Well, I think I will get started. I only have 18 minutes, and I have to sum up. I've been reaching out and starting spiritual conversations for about, I want to say, well, about 10 or 11 years, and so I have 18 minutes to sum up all my experiences there. So I had a little video introduction, but I guess we're not going to do that because it timed out while we were upstairs. Had it all set up. But my name's Jeff Reiman, and I would like to ask you, how many have seen any of my videos on the Manuka Webs group, Facebook group? Okay, so for those of you that haven't, and Dungeons and Dragons, maybe it might be worth it to try to find it. Let's see. I have over 500 videos on there of conversations with people on the streets and in the marketplace. I set a goal about 11 years ago to have a conversation with somebody new, a spiritual conversation with somebody new every day. And so then after doing that for several years, you know, I started to take people from our church. Ann and I, by the way, Ann's my wife right there. So we just moved here from Chicago. I was going to New Life, Mark Job's church in Chicago. And I started to take people from church with me on these witnessing outreach conversations. And I would kind of like after church, I'd find someone and say, hey, you want to set up a time? We can get together, we can go out. And I started to notice that people were avoiding me after church. So I stopped, I stopped doing that, and I just thought, you know what, I'll just record some of the conversations, and if people want to see what goes on, they can watch them on YouTube. So I have a lot of videos on there, and I like to write about them. That's my emphasis, is what I write, not necessarily that anyone sit and watch these videos. But, you know, I'm just trying to help people see that people will not bite your head off if you go out and try to start spiritual conversations with them. If you want to see how to have the conversation, watch the videos, maybe, and or I'll have some handouts and give you some resources. But today it's more like, well, how did the conversation start in the first place? Okay. So first of all, I want to just kind of tell my story a little bit. I was reached out to, like when we talk about Christian outreach, I was reached out to in high school, and that's kind of put outreach in my spiritual DNA, if you will. So it's a part of me to want to return the favor, to want to reach out to people the same way I was reached out to. I was reached out to through an organization called Young Life. So if you've ever heard of Young Life, it's a very relational youth ministry. And they believe, you know, like they would hang out in my high school or go to sporting events or that sort of thing. These were, you know, adults, Christian adults who kind of got to know us. And so that's kind of how I was reached out to. And when I became a Christian, I did it, you know, like when I accepted the call to be a follower of Jesus, we'll put it that way, I knew that it would change my life completely because I am now training to be able to share this good news with other people. And so it's always been a part of what I've wanted to do is to reach out. However, I kind of believe there's like I'll call it a gravitational pull to what's called attractional ministry. Attractional ministry is come to our events. So instead of us going out to share the good news, it's more like you come to our Christian events and you can hear the good news when you come. And so, you know, the world is kind of like trying to teach us to stay in our lane as Christians. And yeah, sure, we can have our events, but and we can preach our gospel, but do it in a certain place. And that's what the world tells us, right? However, Christians also tell us that. And so I kind of was, you know, like my gravitational pull was like, okay, now I'm going to reach out. I started a Young Life area in Chicago, worked with Young Life for, you know, ministries. Ann and I have been involved in many ministries. And yeah, I might be going out to the basketball courts and going out to get to know kids, but it wasn't necessarily to share my faith or have a spiritual conversation. It was more to bring kids into our events or get kids to go to camp where they'd hear the gospel. And so was I actually going out to share my faith? No, not necessarily. It was more come to our events, okay? So, and I think this is true of all of us, the more we know we need to do something, the better that we don't want to do, the better we get at making excuses for it, right? And so I came up with all sorts of excuses for every single situation I found myself in where maybe I should be sharing the gospel, but no, I got this reason why I shouldn't, or that reason. The number one reason I believe that worked for me was, and I think when I'm talking about like how to start spiritual conversations, one is get over our excuses. We've got to get past our excuses, right? So that's why I'm talking about the excuses right now. One is, and this is my number one excuse, I don't want to misrepresent God. So I don't want to be that guy, right? That kind of icky guy, that guy that is kind of pushy and pushing his beliefs on other people. I don't want to be that guy to the point where maybe I'll turn someone off from even going to church ever, and I'll be the reason that they never want to become a Christian. So I don't want to be that guy. That became my number one reason. And I think there's a reason why evangelism, and I don't really call it evangelism. I've learned there's a lot of baggage with that term. I call it maybe gospel outreach is kind of what I favor, but because I'm reaching out with the gospel. But I think why it has some negative connotations, it has like I call it the ick factor, is number one, it's kind of been stolen from us Christians by the Jehovah's Witnesses and by Mormons. And there's that idea that, like their teachings are heretical, we don't want to be associated with them. But then the other reason why I think, if you've ever been approached by them, why it's kind of not, maybe when I say ick, I mean it's not real. Like we're at a church where we want to be real with each other and with God and with the world, right? One of the reasons I think it's kind of disingenuous or inauthentic, it's kind of not real, is because they have a spiel. Right? You guys know what a spiel is?
Yes.
Kind of like a set sermon in their minds, or maybe they went to a program, a Bible study, how to share your faith, and you got to go through these, step by step. And then if you're talking to them and they ask you a question, and then you answer, and then they don't even respond to your answer, they go to the next step. Like it's not a real, authentic conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's not real. So I don't want to be like that. And so that became one of my reasons. Another thing that, and actually this isn't just Jehovah's Witnesses that do this, Christians do it, it kind of reduces the gospel down to kind of like a used car salesman selling someone on the street who's walking by his dealership a car that he never wanted in the first place. What they do, and you've heard of this, it's called bait and switch, right? You guys know what bait and switch is? Like, I'm going to get you involved in this way, and then I'm going to switch it around and do that. And so if you're coming here to think of like, what are some fancy ways we can kind of suck people in and then switch it and then talk about, have a spiritual conversation with them, that's not being real with people either. That's being deceptive, and we don't want to be deceptive, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I haven't, for most of my Christian life, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is not what I would be caught dead doing, even though I knew I should, I guess. So as a matter of fact, I heard of a guy who would go to a grocery store and share his faith with strangers in the grocery store. Now, I remember for years thinking, I wouldn't be caught dead doing that. I would never go to a complete stranger in a grocery store and, strike up a conversation, a spiritual conversation. And I came to a point where right now, I will tell you, that is probably one of the easiest places to do it. And I do it all the time. And so what changed? Well, I can point you to some resources as far as like how to present our faith. If you've ever heard of Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron and his ministry, anyway, I'll give you guys information about that. So that's more about the like how to have the conversation. But I'm so confident in how I can have the conversation that it becomes easy to start one because I know I've got someplace to go with it, if that makes sense. So the second excuse, I don't know how. And that's what we're here, is to figure out how. But I've got, probably maybe 7 minutes left to tell you how. So I want to give you guys, first of all, I want to give you a $100 challenge. I will give any of you $100 for every single time you start up and initiate a spiritual conversation with someone new. How's that sound? Sound okay?
Okay. Pray for me.
All right. Now, I can hear wheels spinning. And if you think about it long enough, all of your creative juices are going to be going, and you're going to be thinking of all the different people you run into. You go to the grocery store, you run into people on the way in. maybe you don't run into them. I mean, you see people, there's people around you, and or you're at the park. You can think, I believe there is enough creativity in this room where I wouldn't have to tell you anything, but with proper motivation, you would figure it out for yourselves. I really believe that. And you know how to go to the internet, and you know how to find resources, and you know how to read books. So there's no shortage of training, there's no shortage of resources out there available. The question isn't, I don't know how to do it. The question is, do I really want to do it, right? So I'm going to just tell you a few little words of advice, and then I know that my time will be cut short. So number one, how did I get started? I came to the point where I realized this is something that I want to do. I'm no good at it. I actually am very, if you get to know me, you'll realize I would be the worst person to have in the, I was waiting for my wife today and standing in the door of the church and everyone was coming in and it's just like, I don't know how to greet people. Like, I would be the worst person to be a greeter. I'm very socially awkward, to be honest. And so I started out like very scared, very petrified of starting a spiritual conversation with someone. The thing that really got me going is I set a goal, a prayerfully set a goal of talking to one person a day and having a conversation with one new person a day. And at first I started to think, well, I'll kind of save them up throughout the week and then I'll go out on Saturday and I'll talk to 7 people. And that's kind of good because once you get on a roll, it becomes easier to talk to the next person. Once you get I call it breaking the sound barrier. Once you're able to start talking about it, it does become easier. And it becomes easier in groups too. But what I was interested in is I want this to be a part of my lifestyle. I want it to be a part of when I go and do errands. Can I just talk to somebody that I just meet at the store or wherever I am? And I can now. And I still get afraid and I still have to work through it. As a matter of fact, first of all, I just want to say it becomes a spiritual discipline. So if you think setting goals, like maybe these conversations should happen naturally, then it'd be really of the Spirit, right? Well, if you think about it, if you have been working on your spiritual disciplines, let's say you want to develop the discipline of Bible reading. You set a goal. I want to read X number of chapters a day. You ask God for help. You don't make promises. It's not a vow. You just say, God, this is my goal. Will you help me? And then now I'm going to rearrange my schedule so it happens. That's what this needs to be. It's kind of a spiritual discipline. It's only going to happen if you make it a spiritual discipline and if you make it a goal. Then the next thing, pray about it. Okay? Now, I've heard a lot of people that I've talked to, just like yourselves, and they say, well, I should pray about that, And I know what's going to happen is they're going to pray about it, but they're not going to do it. So I don't know if you've ever heard the story about a congregation that was praying for rain. The pastor, they were in a drought, and the pastor brought them all out in the field, and they started to pray for rain, and then the pastor said, wait a minute, none of you are taking this seriously. And they're all like, why? What's wrong? He said, not a single one of you brought an umbrella. So if we're going to pray practically, here's how I do it. I go to the grocery store, and here's why I say the grocery store is great for this. Do you know you can go to the grocery store, not buy anything, but push a cart around all day long, right? And no one's going to stop you. No one's going to question it because they may think you just got there, whatever. And I can be looking at the shelves and reading the ingredients, but really, I'm praying. And I'm praying about the guy down the aisle. And I'm praying about this. And I'm praying. That's the kind of... And then sometimes I use tracts to start conversations. I think of them more as like conversation starters. I don't always use tracts, but for shorter conversations, they come in handy. And if my tracts are in my pocket and I'm praying, I'm not going to have a talk. I'm not going to have a conversation with anyone. But if I have my tract out there ready to go, I just kind of naturally just go from praying to talking to someone, and it becomes very natural. So that would be my suggestion. Another thing, you have to kind of define success. We don't want to be a failure, right? And so don't think that you have to take the ball down the court, avoid all sorts of defenders, and then take it in for a layup and dunk the basketball. You have a team. We are part of something way bigger than ourselves, and so if you're going to be successful in gospel outreach, you may just convince an atheist that, maybe you don't even convince them. Challenge an atheist with the idea that God exists, or here's some good arguments for it. Or some people say, just put a pebble in their shoe. What that means is ask them some questions that, are going to bug them to the point where they got to find the answers, Or a lot of times I meet Christians, and I'm not necessarily trying to like share the gospel with them. I'm trying to help them on the next step. A lot of times it's really good to talk to Christians about sharing their faith. Like, what do you do to share your faith? And here I am in the middle of, like, I had reached out to them, and so I'm kind of like setting the example of what I'm challenging them to do. So wherever they're at spiritually, ask a lot of questions. You won't find out anything, or you won't be able to guess where the person's at. You have to find out. So be a good listener, and that's what I think I'm a way better listener than talker. Although Anne's laughing at me because I'm not always a good listener either. Yeah. So I do use tracks sometimes as conversation starters. People, when you use a track, people kind of like have a preset idea in your mind of what you're going to say, and sometimes they might answer according to what they think you want to hear. And so I find that generally conversations aren't that long using tracks, but I do feel good that at least they know that there's something they can read afterwards and check out on. The other thing, though, is asking questions. So if I want to have a much longer conversation, I ask questions. And how do I get it started? I might go up to someone and say, hey, excuse me, this might sound really crazy. I know this is crazy, but it's something I try to do every day. I'd like to ask you a very interesting question. Now, right there, that might be my opening statement. If it's a video on my YouTube channel, I might say, hey, I have a YouTube channel, and I like to ask people interesting questions and then record the conversation. Would you have 5 or 10 minutes or something like that? Sometimes it turns into an hour. And so that's kind of how that starts. But first of all, I make it abnormal by saying, hey, this might be totally crazy. So by admitting what I'm doing is crazy, it shows that I'm not crazy, if that makes sense. In other words, crazy people don't know they're crazy. I know what I'm doing is kind of unusual. And so I'm admitting that to people, and so they don't think that I'm some kind of a Fruit Loop, okay? But at the same time, I try to make it normal. So I say, hey, this is something I try to do every day. And for some reason, I feel like that really, I don't want to say disarms people, but they don't feel like I'm threatening them. They don't feel like I'm stalking them. They don't feel like I'm targeting them. This is just something I normally do. If you're just getting started, you can say, hey, I'm trying to develop a habit of asking somebody new this question every day. And here's my key question. After 10 years of experience, the best question I can ask people, just random people on the street or in the marketplace, what do you think happens after this life? That's the question I ask. And when I ask that question, it's kind of general enough, well, it's kind of specific enough that they know that I'm asking something spiritual, of a spiritual nature, but it's general enough that they don't necessarily know where I'm coming from, and they're honest about their answer, and I'm asking them questions. And the thing that I've really discovered is people absolutely love to talk about themselves. They really do. Like, your beliefs, you have your beliefs for a reason, and you want the whole world to know your beliefs. I mean, so if someone is asking you and sincerely asking you and listening and responding to your answers and not giving you a spiel, but actually responding to your answers, people love that. And so usually I'll say, I want to ask you, what do you think happens after this life? And whatever kind of beliefs or doubts you have about that, how did you get there? What's your story? And people love to tell their story. What are some of the spiritual mileposts along the way? And so I'm asking them questions and doing a lot of listening. And so generally in my conversations, I'm probably running out of time, in my conversations, I'm starting, maybe the first half might be I'm doing a lot of listening, and you might, if you watch the videos, you might wonder, why isn't he sharing the gospel? Well, I'm trying to hear where they're at spiritually. And then I'll respond slowly, and then a lot of times they're asking me questions because they're returning the favor. I listen to them, now they're listening to me. And why did you come and talk to me, about this? And so those would be just kind of like the words of advice. And the business cards there, this is something that I leave with people. I invite them to a further conversation. I've got my phone number here on the bottom. It's got, an invitation to do a Bible study, something like that. Generally, people don't respond to these. Don't call me. My phone isn't ringing off the hook. But, I guess my hope is that, if they don't want to talk to that weird guy that stopped them on the street, at least they'll have somebody in their life that they can talk to. But it also has my YouTube channel on it, so you can go and check that out. And what else? places for answering questions and things like that. And then I have a resource sheet that kind of gives the philosophy behind, well, like, what is it that changed my life as far as having the ability to share my faith in a way that is not threatening or judgmental or icky, we'll say. And that's what this is all about. So this is more not the how to start the conversation, but, you know, like how a conversation can look. So it's a little bit, you know, heavy. Read it through and take some time. But then at the end are some excellent, excellent resources that I highly recommend. And then I've got some things from me too at the bottom, but some of the books that I recommend and stuff like that. So, sound okay? I think we got to go.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.